Have you ever been curious about what it's like to go through a drug trial before a medication is released? My name is Jonathan James, and I'm with Hope Charities, and I'm super excited to bring to you a live online event to talk about exactly this, talking about emerging therapies for people living with bleeding disorders. There is so much that goes into the trial itself and trying to discover whether or not a medication works, and we think that it's super important to have a conversation about the intensity of what requirements are, but also about the process of people who volunteer for these things and what actually brings new and emerging therapies to light. And so I'm really excited about this event. You can go on our website and register for this event right now. It's going to be on February 18th and 19th, and it is going to be a fantastic online live event. We're going to be giving away lots of prizes and have lots of fun together. But I think it's going to be a really amazing time to learn more about what products are in the pipeline, what things are coming down the road, and then also to talk a little bit more about trial design and how that may impact our community for years and even generations to come. Today, I've invited a friend of mine, Shelly Reed, to join me to talk a little bit more about her experience with going through a drug trial. And Shelly, it is great to see you. Thanks so much for joining me today on the Hope Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. It's great to be here. You're my first podcast I've ever done.
Wow, I'm so honored. This is so fun. I started doing podcasting about, I don't know, 2 years ago, and I thought, heck, why not? Everybody else is doing it, we'll give it a shot. And it's kind of taken off a little bit, so it's exciting to see to get to experiment with these tools and everything, but just another good way to be able to communicate with our community. But thanks so much for joining me today, and I'm really excited to talk a little bit about your journey of living with a bleeding disorder, how you're personally affected, but also your journey of participating in an early trial. And I just think it's a wonderful thing for us to be able to have this type of conversation, because there may be people out there contemplating, should I do this? Should I not do this? I've been offered an opportunity. Or maybe they're just wondering, what it's like to go through it without, is it painful? Is it long? Is it difficult? Is it a lot of travel? All of those things. So I appreciate you being willing to share your story today. But let's start out with just kind of high level. Give us where you're from and how you're affected by a bleeding disorder.
Yeah, absolutely. So I live in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is just right outside of Nashville. And my connection to the bleeding disorders community is I myself have von Willebrand disease. And actually, quite a few family members are also affected with it as well. So it's crazy to say this, but I've probably been involved in the community now going on 3 decades.
Wow. That's incredible. Well, it's one of those things where, sometimes there's a difficulty in even getting the diagnosis. How were
Mhm.
you diagnosed? Did you have a family history? Did you kind of know coming into it since other family members have it?
Yes, I was fortunate to know from birth that I had von Willebrand disease. My mom actually got diagnosed first, and that was, I believe, after she had my brother. So she didn't know right away. It took her years and years to become diagnosed, but we were fortunate in that regard. My sister and I were both diagnosed from birth.
Wow, that is a blessing. I mean, a lot of people don't know for years, and of course, all kinds of challenges can come from that. But it really is a great thing that you're able to know so early on. And were you able, I guess, by having known and having a family history, I guess you were able to get some form of treatment pretty early as well. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So my go-to product, even today, is Humate P,
Okay.
and that's been primarily what I've been treating with, as well as Stimate and Amicar. So
Okay.
thankfully, I've kind of always had those options available to me.
Have the full cocktail. I mean, if at first you don't succeed, keep trying. That's good. So what about talk about this opportunity that you had to get into a drug trial program, and what was that like? I mean, how did it come about, and how did it feel to you as a person just trying to learn and engage?
Yeah. So I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the blood center there is really well known for having some of the great minds that have contributed to the advanced research, especially with von Willebrand disease. Some of our listeners may be familiar with Dr. Joan Gill. She passed a couple of years ago, but she was a founding member of the Hemostasis and Thrombosis Research Society, and she was just my hematologist for many, many years. And when I would go to my comprehensive annual appointment at the Hemophilia Treatment Center in Milwaukee, that's typically how we would hear that there were trials going on for any products and things like that. It was the staff that would talk about it and basically make me and my family aware that those were going on.
Wow. And when you would go to these, I think one of the things that's kind of undervalued in our community today in some ways is how important it is to go to your annual visit and make certain you never miss. But I do think that this is the best place to learn about trial programs. Usually, a trial program is being released through a hemophilia treatment center. And so, if you're going to see maybe a local hemoc or maybe just a doctor that's prescribing you this one singular medication, you may not hear of these kinds of opportunities. Is that right to say that?
Yeah, absolutely. I know when I participated in my first trial, I was in high school, so I was a little bit on the younger side at that point.
Mhm.
And there weren't a lot of treatment options, and there still really aren't for von Willebrand disease. We're definitely lagging behind the hemophilia treatments that are in trial currently and also coming
Yeah.
to market. So I would definitely agree that that's accurate.
Yeah. And so you had treatment before, you hear about this trial coming out. What was
Mhm.
it that made you sort of interested in participating?
Yeah, I think for me it was about, wow, there's really only like one or two treatment options out there for people with von Willebrand disease. And I thought like being a part of the trial would, maybe it wouldn't benefit me personally, but for those who maybe Humate P wasn't an option for them or wasn't working effectively, this kind of opens the door to them having a choice in products, using something different that's maybe a little bit more effective. So
Mhm.
just kind of thinking down the road of how it could benefit others, that was kind of my main motivator to get involved with the trial.
I love that. And so you get this opportunity, you hear about what's going on, and then you say, yeah, I think I will participate because I just think maybe I can contribute to the betterment of our whole community and maybe the journey of my own health. And so were you nervous? Was it something you were super nervous about or scared? Or you just kind of bold and just went into it thinking, yeah, let's give it a shot?
I think a little nervous in the sense of
Yeah.
I didn't really know what to expect, and I didn't know what, you have to sign an informed consent form that you're going to be in the trial, and it's very detailed. It's often a lot of pages to read through. But for me, I think I was nervous about the possible side effects because that
Yeah.
is something that they said, up to this point, these are some things that could happen by you doing the trial and by you participating. So I think there was a little bit in the back of my mind, like, oh, I could have these symptoms, whether it's an allergy that could come up or something along those lines. So that was probably where the nervousness and the anxiousness came in. But I was mostly excited though to participate, and I really didn't know how many other people were participating in the trial across the US or even beyond. So that
Yeah.
was kind of an exciting part for it.
Yeah, I think that that's one thing that's sort of interesting. I mean, I've participated in trials before, and I know others have as well. It's like there's this sort of blind study thing going on where you don't really know, like, what all is, everyone else's experience is. All you know is yours, and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
with that can come the burden of additional blood work or additional travel
Mm-hmm.
to the treatment center, or additional. Usually the paperwork's pretty heavy up front, but it's not always throughout the whole event. It's just really on the front end. But I
Yeah.
mean, they by the time they've gotten to human trials, they've already been testing these medications for a long time, and so there's a sense of efficacy and already
Mm-hmm.
what they know is going to happen. But by the time I think that they get to this stage, they're inviting people to participate. It's kind of just to see, okay, is everything that we've studied really what we think it is, and it's more of a
Mm-hmm.
confirming moment than it is really an investigation. Although they like to use all these scary words that make you feel a little bit uncertain. But in that journey for you, did you have a lot of extra travel to the treatment center, a lot of extra blood work that you had to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are definitely some things that are considerations when you do a trial. I remember having to go in a couple of times. I believe it was like every other week, to have the treatment administered and then basically have factor levels tested consistently to see like
Mhm.
how I was reacting to it and that sort of thing. So I would say that there was a bit of travel involved and a bit of time there because I'd have to take off of work and school and that sort of thing to get there to the treatment center.
Mhm.
The other consideration too is with this particular medicine at the time, it needed to be a very specifically like refrigerated product. There was like an
Mhm.
actual temperature that was very regulated, and they ended up giving us like a mini fridge and a thermometer to measure that and keep track of the temperature. And I think that was honestly for me the most annoying part because I had to consistently like look at the fridge temperatures and record them in a log and that sort of thing. And that was not a piece that I thought was going to be part of it. So that was a
Wasn't in
little
the
bit
paperwork.
surprising to
You
me.
didn't see that in the introductory paperwork. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So,
Okay, I
and then we
appreciate
had,
that.
of course, to return the fridge and the thermometer and things like that after the trial was done. But
Yeah.
yeah, the rest was a breeze. The getting poked and the getting the levels and stuff, I didn't mind all of that.
Yeah. And what was your experience? I mean, did you start to notice a change? Did you feel like it was, the same, better, worse? Like, did you start to see anything for you that was like, oh my gosh, maybe this is, I mean, there's always a concern, I think, at least for me. And I don't,
Mhm,
maybe other people are different, but for me, I'm always like, they call it the placebo effect where you're not
mhm.
getting anything really different, but you think it's better just because you're getting, I mean, did you have any of these thoughts? Like the mental gymnastics that you go through sometimes, I think can be a lot more of a roller coaster than what you think of on the outset, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, I think just the newness of it was exciting. I didn't feel
Yeah,
any different. Like
yeah.
I didn't feel like all of a sudden I had superpowers after getting infused or anything like that. But
Right.
I think, it really did make me realize like, is this a product that I could realistically switch to from what I'm currently
Mhm.
using? What are kind of the differences in using my normal product versus this one that's coming to market?
Yeah. And it sounds like when you went through this trial that there was, of course a lot of steps and everything, but when you
Hmm.
completed the trial, and you don't have to tell us what the medication was or what have you, but just
Yeah.
out of curiosity, what was at some point the goal is that it becomes a commercial product.
Hmm.
And so when it does become available commercially, was it something that you were excited to go to, or did you stay with what you were on previously?
Yeah, great question. I actually did not end up switching to the product, but it did come to market, which was really exciting.
Yeah.
So I was glad to see that that came to fruition here in the US. The reason I didn't end up switching is because my current product works really well for me. It's one of those things where the trial drug was very comparable, but for
Mhm.
me, I didn't really see a big need to switch because what I had was working really well. Now,
Sure.
there's a couple factors that I might have changed my mind if it was a little bit different. For example, maybe if it was less of a dose of clotting factor that I'd have to take, or maybe it was subcutaneous instead of intravenous, or like things like
Right.
that would be like an actual game changer in terms of the preparation process.
Mhm.
That would have been something that probably would have made me switch, but it was
Mhm.
like the same amount of factor, the same results and things. So for me, I was kind of like, I'm just going to stick with what works.
I think that this is really a great point and something that not everyone experiences. I think a lot of people that participate in trials do end up going on to the medication long term, but
Hmm.
there is one of the things I love about your story is that there really isn't an obligation, right? It just because you
Yeah.
went on the trial, there's no contractual agreement or obligation for you to have to go on to the treatment once it becomes commercialized, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
it depends on the trial, of course, but definitely one of the things you can always ask is during the trial itself, is there a possibility that you can withdraw from it?
Mhm.
So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, I do think that that's something that people get a little bit nervous about too. Is that like they
Mhm.
think once they're in it, they can't get out of it, and that's a great point to make because, there is always an exit strategy for anyone who doesn't feel comfortable, or if there's an adverse event or something happens.
Mhm.
Of course, they're monitoring that very closely. But
Yeah.
overall, when you completed this process, did you feel a sense of satisfaction that you did contribute to the greater good? Because I know that was a motivating factor for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the piece that maybe for me was missing is like, there was no follow up unless I had been on top of watching what was happening with the clinical trials after I was involved until it came to market. I mean, I remember when the news release came out about it being released to market, and I was really excited. But like, there was nobody that personally reached out to me and was like, "Hey, look, like this is now a thing because you participated in the trial." So it
Right.
was just kind of like I was already being really on top of researching what was going on in the bleeding disorders community. So I think if I hadn't have been that involved, it might have taken me a little bit longer to actually hear that it had come to market.
Yeah. Yeah, we're all kind of a little bit of science nerds, I think, in this community. And one of the things that I love is that, it does sort of satisfy that thing that you feel like you participated, you volunteered for something in a meaningful way,
Mhm.
I do love that. Have you always kind of been a science nerd or interested in that? Is that something you keep up with even still?
Yeah, absolutely. The genetics aspect of studying the bleeding disorders and how they're inherited and how they're passed on to kids. That's all been
Yeah.
something I've been super interested in.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. Well, I'm really just thankful. I want to say I don't know that anybody's maybe ever said this to you before, but I just think as a community, I want to say a big thank you to you for offering yourself to be willing to participate in this because I actually know the product that you were on, and I also know that it's really impacted a lot of people positively, and I think for that change, like some of the things that to me are striking is that the indications, sometimes the details, you don't really always know this. I know a little bit about the details of the study you were in, and actually the indication itself was for preventative ongoing prophylactic use, and that's not
Hmm.
always the case with every medication. And so and at the same time, I'm like you. I think anybody that's been around this community for a long time is kind of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. So the fact that you had all of those elements going on and yet you still offered yourself as an opportunity to really kind of contribute to the greater good, I
Hmm.
just want to say thank you, and we really appreciate your investment in that because I think it really makes a bigger difference than what a lot of people even realize.
Mhm. Absolutely. And there's a couple of questions you would want to make sure to ask your provider if you're
Yeah.
considering entering into a clinical trial. First of all, what is it that you want to get out of it? Why do you want to participate? And it doesn't even have to be something that you share with others.
That's good.
Sometimes with clinical trials, there is a financial compensation aspect to it. So that could be a motivator. Maybe it won't benefit you, or maybe it will in terms of that product coming to market. So just kind of donating that experience so that it's an option for others. So I would say why you want to participate. Also, is a clinical trial right for you? It just depends on kind of what your situation is with your own bleeding disorder. There could be things like the time commitment. Maybe it's not something that you can fit into your schedule, or the amount of travel required because you might need to go to a specific clinic in order to participate, and things like that. So those are things, and as well as what your current routine is. Maybe you're doing prophylaxis, and so that's something to consider. You might have to go off of prophylaxis of your current treatment in order to try the trial one. So there's sort of a lot of factors there to consider, but just kind of knowing, your own routine and what's going to work for you is definitely a good question to ask as well. And then if you don't understand something, the clinical team is really great at explaining that. It's really important that you feel confident and assured to participate, that anything that you're worried about in terms of like risks or side effects, those are all things that you can have addressed by the trial team, and that you have a contact that you can ask questions if something does arrive during the course of that. And then finally, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but can I change my mind after I give consent? And so that's one thing. Are you able to withdraw during the trial at any point if something happens? So I would want to know that if I was having an adverse reaction, like an allergy or something like that, that would interrupt my participation in the trial, that was an option to kind of opt out at that point, even though I signed the informed consent form.
Yeah. That's so good and so helpful. I love what you said about the fact that there's an element that you have to know what it's if it's good for you, and also the
Mm-hmm.
piece about I really love the fact that you said that talked about the trial team, like one of the things I think I think in an ongoing basis, a lot of people know that they can call their treatment center and ask questions, but I'm not
Mhm.
sure that we often leverage that as much as we really probably could or should. And so
Mhm.
when you're in a trial, I do think that's important to know for anybody contemplating this, that there I don't want to say they're more attentive, but there's a direct line for questions immediately. And you can really get
Mhm.
a lot of resources from the folks that are really there helping you. And they're usually people that you know already. They're people that are, at the treatment center that have been giving you care for some time, but they're very, very attentive when you're going through a trial. And I think you kind
Mhm.
of have like a Batman red phone access when you're going through those things. So that's really
Mhm.
informative and helpful for anybody who maybe hasn't been through this, is to say, like, if I ever have a question, can I get an
Mhm.
answer? We don't have to go on some website and wait for some bot to like respond to you. You can actually interact with the people that you know and trust and love, and they're usually very, very, very attentive to your needs. And so those are
Mhm.
great points. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're just curious about what clinical trials are out there, there's a lot of really great resources, even within our community and the CDC as well. If you go to clinicaltrials.gov, you can actually put your address in, you can put in your bleeding disorder, and this applies, to any chronic illness really. And you can see what trials are going on in your location that you might be able to participate in. And there's also some great information both on the National Bleeding Disorder Foundation's website on clinical trials essentials, which answers a lot of those questions like how to be a part of the research, what to expect, understanding consent, what happens in a trial, and just some of those additional resources as well. And I do know too that the HFA, the Hemophilia Federation of America, has a clinical trial locator on their website as well, where you can find out more about research and trials there too. So those are
That's
all
great.
great ways. If you're a research nerd, those are great ways to see what's out there. And of course, be in touch with your hemophilia treatment center, because your provider is really going to know what clinical trials are going on, if they're participating in it, and they would be the ones to really connect you and get you more information about those as well, so you're well informed.
Yeah, that's so, so good. And also, we're going to be going over a lot of this at our event coming up on February 18th and 19th. But one of the things that I love is also going to pubmed.com. You can learn a lot of what trials that have been completed and the research that has been going on there as well, which is another great resource tool. But one of the things I'm excited about this event coming up here on the 18th and 19th, excuse me, a tongue twister for some reason today. But the exciting thing is Dr. David Clark is going to be going over the details of everything that's in the pipeline and really talking about what's coming out soon. So that's going to be fascinating, as well as kind of going in more depth about some of those tools. But Shelly, thank you so much for joining me today and for being willing to kind of share your story. I think there's lots of things you can read about, but man, when you hear from somebody else that has walked down that path before, I think it's really striking. And one of the things I know I touched on briefly, even before our recording, was really about how important it is to get participation in these trials up as they become available, and specifically for women in bleeding disorders to participate more. If you look at the census, it's really very, very lopsided. It's mostly males that participate, and we need everybody to participate to reflect the entirety of the community. And so, do you have any thoughts about that, as far as what encouraging women to get involved whenever possible?
Yeah, I think, and trials are also open to children as well.
Yes.
There's a thing what's called assent, which is basically when the parent gives consent for their child to
Mhm.
participate in the trial. So it's something even to look into if you've got children that are under the age of 18,
Mhm.
for them to participate in as well. So, but for
Mhm.
women, it's really important for us to get involved, because every single treatment that's available out there right now has been in a clinical trial that was tested
Mhm.
by somebody like myself, for example. So that's kind of the amazing impact of participating in the trial, is that there's a great chance that it is going to make it to market. It could be a couple of years even from the when the trial happens, but that for me was one of the most rewarding parts, is being able to see that treatment become available for others after the fact. So
That's
definitely
right.
encourage you to get involved, and also to assure you as well that you can also help further research without participating in a clinical trial too. Sometimes there's things like interviews and surveys that you can do that help medical professionals understand your bleeding disorder, and also pharmaceutical companies that are trying to bring a drug to market as well. And I've participated in those also. So if you find that, oh man, I can't participate in a clinical trial, that's okay. There's other ways you can also get involved in further research.
That's such a great point, and the surveys are generally pretty quick. They're not usually this long drawn out thing where you're doing a lot of blood work. A lot of times they're qualitative, but they can also be just through questionnaires and maybe an interview on a call like this or something like that. But there's opportunities all the time. I found
Mhm.
that there's a lot of great resources for that for sure, and I think that that's something to be aware of. And some of those, like you mentioned earlier, are paid opportunities, but even
Mhm.
sometimes I find the ones that are not paid opportunities are still a great way to get back, and really an opportunity for us to be able to contribute to the greater good for the whole community, because somebody has to go first. Somebody has to ask the right questions. Somebody has to do the work behind the scenes that nobody really sees before these things come to light and become really valuable to us for generations. So it's a good
Mhm.
point.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so excited about just being able to, hear your story and get to know a little bit more about what you've gone through. But also, thank you again so much for participating in this, but also for being here today, because I know that there's probably a lot of people out there that are still wondering should they get involved or should they not get involved in this. And I know it can be a little bit scary, but you didn't
Mhm.
make it feel scary at all. You made me feel so much more excited about maybe getting involved if I can, and so that's a really great
Great.
thing. And I'm excited about just the future. I think the future for the bleeding disorders community in general is brighter today than it has
Mhm.
ever been in history, and I truly believe that. And a lot of that is because the advancement of medication, but there's also really great things that are happening within all of the support systems around that, including the improvement of clinical trials and incorporating more and more folks. So,
Mhm.
with that, I just, really again, just want to say thank you so much for your contribution to the greater good in the trial program, but also for your time today, because it's been very helpful.
Yeah, likewise. It's been great talking with you, Jonathan.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. I'm going to hopefully see all of our friends here on February 18th and 19th whenever possible. But once again, Shelly, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. We look forward to seeing you in the next time around.
Thanks so much, Jonathan.